So we are beginning day 5. I had a lovely breakfast at the hotel. I'll probably do a small feature on the hotel because it was really nice and it was such a lifesaver after yesterday's hike. Yeah, yesterday was a little bit more mellow than the previous day. I still did like 43,000 steps or something, but it wasn't as brutal. I saw 3 castles, which were all worth seeing in their own way. And yeah, I even uncovered a little bit of hidden Polish history surrounding the January uprising, which was a nice surprise along one of the trails. Today, I have dedicated to the desert behind me, the Błędów Desert. So I'll be telling you all about that in this video and showing you what there is to see. I'm currently in Klucze, which means keys in Polish. And we'll see if it unlocks my heart. But honestly, really enjoying this whole adventure. Sure, it's tiring, sure, it's knackering, but I'm also seeing some of the most beautiful sights in Poland, so I hope you're enjoying the journey so far.
Dzień dobry and welcome to A Brit in Poland. With this channel, I travel across the country, I bring you the culture, and I show you just how amazing Poland is. So I invite you on my journey. If you want to see more, I have Facebook and Instagram profiles, which you will find links to in the description below. And if you want to really help out, you can turn to my Patreon or Patronite accounts, again in the description. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Do zobaczenia. Day 5 began with the best breakfast of the entire trail. The hotel in Klucze had already been my favourite place to stay so far, and the morning only confirmed it. After several days of surviving on whatever appeared along the route, sitting down to a proper breakfast felt almost suspiciously luxurious. The weather had changed too. After 4 days of carrying a coat against cool mornings and sudden rain, I finally packed it into my backpack. The sun was out, the air was warmer, and the trail had become brighter almost overnight, which was rather convenient because Poland was about to show me a desert. Before reaching it, however, I had to cross Klucze itself. It would be easy to describe Klucze simply as the gateway to the Błędów Desert, but the town has a much older identity of its own. Its origins reach back to the 14th century, and industry shaped the settlement for generations. Iron ore was mined here, while mills, a brewery, and even a glassworks operated nearby, the glassworks using sand taken from the desert itself. During the 19th century, mining expanded. Then, in 1887, the estate was acquired by industrialist Ludwik Mauve, who began developing Klucze on a much larger scale. A paper factory followed, helping transform the village into the industrial community that grew around it. So, although I was walking towards one of Poland's most unusual natural landscapes, the story of Klucze was closely tied to the industry and to the ways people had altered the land around them. Those traces would soon appear again. For now, I continued through the town, slowly climbing towards the wooded hill of Chubatka. Not Chubaka, which would also be cool. The walk from the hotel took most of an hour. Streets gradually gave way to trees, and the ordinary morning surroundings offered very little indication of what was waiting beyond them. Then I reached the top. From the viewpoint at Chubatka, the landscape suddenly opened beneath me. Beyond the trees lay a broad basin of pale sand, surrounded on almost every side by dense green forest. After 4 days of castles, limestone hills, and enclosed woodland, it looked like a piece of another country had somehow been dropped into southern Poland. Chubatka is one of the main viewpoints overlooking the Błędów Desert and provides the clearest first impression from the Klucze side. Somewhere below, was the route I intended to explore. All I had to do was find my way down. From Chubatka, the path dropped steeply back into the forest. The open air disappeared almost immediately. The trees closed around the trail, the temperature fell beneath the canopy, and for a while the desert seemed to have vanished completely. The first landmarks on the way down were the Red Pond and the Green Pond. But despite their names, neither appeared especially committed to displaying the advertised colour. They looked more like quiet woodland pools surrounded by dense vegetation, and almost entirely hidden from the landscape above. Their history, however, was tied to the industrial past of Klucze. Both ponds occupy former mining excavations, gradually filled with water after the workings were abandoned. The Red Pond takes its name from the reddish clay once extracted in the area, rather than from any dramatic colour in the water. It was another reminder that the landscape around Klucze had been shaped repeatedly by human activity. Mines had become ponds, forests had grown over former workings, and somewhere beyond the trees, an area of exposed sand had developed into something that looked remarkably like a desert. It was a strange approach. I had begun above the landscape, looking down across an open basin. Now I was walking beneath thick forest, passing still water and following narrow paths with no sand in sight. Then the trees began to thin. The ground became lighter beneath my feet. Small patches of sand appeared between the roots, then widened across the path. And finally, the forest opened. Ahead of me lay the Błędów Desert. Standing at its edge, the first surprise was how convincing it looked. The pale sand stretched beneath a wide blue sky, broken only by patches of grass and young trees. After several days of damp forest paths, limestone hills, and castle ruins, it felt as though the trail had briefly wandered into another country. But the Błędów Desert is not a desert in the usual climatic sense. The sand itself is ancient, deposited here by glaciers during the Ice Age. For thousands of years, however, it remained largely hidden beneath soil and forest. The landscape began to change during the Middle Ages. The nearby Olkusz region had been an important centre for mining lead, silver, and zinc. Mines required enormous amounts of timber, both to support underground tunnels and to produce charcoal for industry. Forests were gradually cleared, the thin soil was disturbed, and the buried sand became exposed. Once the trees were gone, the wind took over. Sand began moving across the landscape, forming dunes and creating an open area that eventually covered more than 30 square kilometres. By the 19th century, travellers were describing mirages in sandstorms in southern Poland. It became known as the Polish Sahara. The reality, however, was more interesting than the nickname. This was not an ancient wilderness untouched by people. It was a landscape created almost accidentally by centuries of mining, deforestation, and industry. And then people changed it again. During the 20th century, pine trees and other vegetation were planted to stabilize the sand. The program worked so well that much of the desert gradually disappeared beneath new forest. What remains today is only part of its former extent, a mixture of open sand, grassland, young trees, and woodland slowly trying to return. In other words, people helped create the desert, later tried to remove it, and are now working to preserve what survived. Polish landscape management likes to keep the plot moving. Once I stepped properly onto the sand, the scale became more difficult to judge. From Chubatka, the desert had looked like one broad open basin, Down at ground level, it was divided by vegetation, pathways, and small rises in the land. Walking across it was also slower than it appeared. After days of compact forest trails, every step sank slightly beneath my boots. The terrain was mostly flat, but the loose sand created its own quiet resistance. Fortunately, this was also the first genuinely warm day of the trail. My coat had finally been packed into the backpack. The sun was high, and beneath the enormous white clouds, the desert looked almost theatrical. Under grey skies, it might have felt like an unusual patch of exposed ground. In full sunshine, the illusion was much stronger. For a while, I simply followed the paths across the open sand, stopping regularly to look across the landscape to work out where I could actually go next. The desert has also been used for military training for much of the 20th century, and parts of the wider area remain connected to the army. Old military displays besides the route made that history rather difficult to ignore. There was also something slightly surreal about standing in a Polish desert beside artillery equipment, surrounded by forest on almost every horizon. I wanted to see more of the northern side, so I tried following the edge of the open area in search for another viewpoint. From above, it had appeared as though I might simply continue across the sand. On the ground, matters are less cooperative. The trees became increasingly dense, and eventually I reached a river or a stream with no obvious way across. What had looked like one continuous desert from Chubatka was actually a fragmented landscape, divided by water, woodland, and areas that were not easily accessible. And after wandering along the edge for a while, I accepted that I was not going to unlock the secret northern expansion pack. Instead, I turned back towards the established paths and continued along the southern section. The landscape opened once again, and in the distance I could finally see the wooden platforms of Róża Wiatrów rising from the sand. After several hours of exploring, I had found the desert's other main viewpoint, in the south at least. I spent a little time there before beginning the journey back across the desert. By now, the landscape felt more familiar. The paths were easier to read, the open stretches of sand less mysterious, and Chubatka waited somewhere beyond the trees on the opposite side. The return route carried me back through the forest and eventually towards the hill I had descended earlier that morning. Climbing back up was less elegant. After several hours on the sand, the legs were beginning to feel the day, and the final ascent to the viewpoint was a firm reminder that deserts may be flat, but reaching them is not always so considerate. At the top, I stopped for a short break and bought a cold, lemon slushy style drink. It was exactly what I needed. From Chubatka, I looked down across the desert once again. Earlier that morning, it had been an unfamiliar landscape waiting to be explored. Now, I could trace much of the route I had walked across it. Then it was time to leave the sand behind and return to Klucze. The walk back through Klucze felt rather different from the one I had made that morning. Then the desert had still been somewhere ahead of me. Now it was behind me, along with several hours of sand, forest paths, and one unsuccessful attempt to investigate its northern edge. The town also felt warmer now. My coat remained buried in the backpack, the streets were brighter in the afternoon sun, and the quiet morning atmosphere had given way to the ordinary rhythm of the day. I retraced my route through Klucze, passing once again through the industrial town that had grown beside this strange landscape. Earlier, its history had helped explain the world around it, the former mine workings that became ponds, the forests cleared for industry, and the exposed sand that eventually grew into the desert. Now Klucze had a more practical role. Before leaving the town, I stopped at Żabka to pick up drinks and supplies for the final stretch to Rabsztyn. The desert had been the day's main attraction, but the walking was far from finished. From Klucze, I followed the main road towards Jaroszowiec. It was not the most dramatic section of the trail, but after spending much of the day wandering across sand, the simplicity was almost welcome. A road, a direction, and somewhere ahead. The red markers waiting to guide me onwards. Near Jaroszowiec, I rejoined the official trail. There was still around 10 kilometres between me and Rabsztyn, and the desert was over. The day, rather less helpfully, was not. Once I was back on the red trail, the main road gradually fell away behind me. The route alternated between stretches of forest and open fields, changing just often enough to keep the final kilometres from becoming completely repetitive. After the brightness of the desert, the trees felt cooler and more enclosed, while the fields briefly opened the landscape again beneath the afternoon sun. By this stage, though, scenery had become secondary to distance. I had already spent several hours exploring the desert, crossing the sand, climbing back to Chubatka, and walking through Klucze for the second time. The remaining 10 kilometres were less about discovery and more about maintaining a rhythm. Then the houses disappeared, the fields and forests returned, and Rabsztyn remained somewhere ahead. The final stretch was not especially difficult in isolation, but by day 5 the body was no longer judging distances individually. Every kilometre arrived carrying the weight of all the ones that had come before it. And eventually the castle appeared. Rabsztyn stood above the village on a rocky hill, its ruined walls catching the last of the afternoon light. After hours of sand, roads, fields and forest, it was a welcome sign that the day was finally reaching its destination. Unfortunately, the castle had already closed. By this point, arriving outside a locked castle felt less like bad luck and more like one of the established traditions of the Eagle's Nest Trail. There was no point arguing with the opening hours. I continued to the hotel, dropped my backpack, and settled into the restaurant for food and a few well-earned drinks. The castle had been the day's great surprise. The final kilometres had simply been the price of reaching the next chapter, and Rabsztyn still had one more mystery waiting. According to local legend, the ruins above conceal an enchanted palace deep beneath the hill, home to sleeping knights and 2 children turned to stone, awakened only briefly when the church bells ring on Palm Sunday. The gates above may have been closed, but somewhere below them, the castle was said to be sleeping too. Thank you very much for watching. This has been part 5 out of 7 of the Eagle's Nest Trail. You will find part 6 coming soon on YouTube or Rumble, for as long as I have YouTube. But please give the video a like, and if you have any questions, leave a comment, and of course subscribe if you would like to see more. Thank you very much. I've been a Brit in Poland. Do zobaczenia.